What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and today we're going to be going over a health and shield system in our first-person shooter tutorial series. So previously in the series we had this red progress bar in the top left corner, that is our health bar, and we were able to basically run into these spikes on the ground and lose health. Now you can see I have a blue bar and a red bar. The blue bar represents shields while the red bar represents health. These shields should be taken from first. Any damage that is left over after my shield breaks should be applied to my health, and then I go on losing health as I take more damage. So we're going to be going over that sort of system today, the difference between health and shields, when we should take damage, when we're going to, bring that damage over to the health after the shield is broken, and I'm also going to do something else in here too. So if we go into our trap, and we look at our take damage function here. I've updated this a bit. Of course, we'll get into this in a minute. But I also have the ability to ignore the shields or ignore the health. So a good example of this is something like Apex Legends caustic gas. Or along the same lines of Apex Legends, a crypto drone EMP. So if I want to ignore shields, that means the damage is applied directly to my health and I can still be killed. Even though I had full shield, at that point I had no more health, so I died. I can also ignore the health if I want something to only affect my shields. So even when my shield is out, my health will not decrease when I'm taking damage. I could even ignore both of them, and it would call it take damage, but not take away my health or shields. This is a very rare case that you may want this, but say you're in a state of invulnerability, you may want to still register hits and play sound effects and particle effects at hit locations when a player theoretically was going to receive damage, but because of their state, maybe they're invincible or they're in some sort of invulnerability frame section, then you don't want to actually have them lose health or lose shield. So you could ignore both in that case. So we have a lot of different use cases here today. We're going to apply all this in our take damage function in the code. And we're going to update our trap object here to support that as well. So we'll come back to all this in a minute, but those are the different things you'll be able to do after following today's episode. But before we get started on today's logic, if you'd like to get caught up on the series, here's the playlist right here in the top right corner. You can see every episode related to the series, as well as a few others that could be beneficial. I'll also link this icon in the top right corner for the episode where we did the health mechanics, so you can see how we set up our health bar and how we initially made our take damage function. All right, and we're going to get started now. So we can go into our code, and we're going to go to our base character.h. For me, FPS tutorial character.h. All right, now if I scroll down here, I've added a few new variables. Specifically, I actually added one variable and one function. So we have this shield amount. Just like we have a float for health, that way we know how much health the player currently has, or the character currently has. We need to know how much shield the character currently has. I called it shield amount because I thought shield was a little too generic. You could have different levels of shields. You could have a shield object that blocks bullets. It's not entirely clear. Like health, you can kind of assume that it refers to the health of the character, but the shield can be a few different things. So I think shield amount is a good word here, but it doesn't matter what you call it, just as long as you know what it is that you're looking at. So I've made this float shield amount, and of course I've made it uProperty because we're going to access it in the blueprint, specifically in the widget today, where we can show how much shield the character has. All right, and then if you scroll down to the take damage function, we're going to update this a bit as well. So previously, the take damage function was blueprint callable, void take damage, and it had float damage amount, and that was it. So with that, all we could do is we had our health, we took in a damage amount, we subtracted the damage from our health, and determined how much health we had left over. Now we want to add 2 new booleans, should ignore shields, should ignore health. I've defaulted them both to false. When you default variables, what it means is that if I don't choose an option, okay, if I call take damage, I can actually call it and only pass it a damage amount, okay, and this function will still work. If I don't choose to pass these in at all, they're going to default to false, meaning they won't be used, and thus neither shields nor health will be ignored, and damage will go on regularly. So defaulting them just allows you to get by without inputting these functions. It also kind of sets up, when you look at this function, what the expected value will be for most cases. Okay. And then we can go into our FPS draw character.cpp, and we want to set our default value for our shields. So I have health as 1.0. I put shield amount also as 1.0. Remember, progress bars in Unreal are by default a ratio, so they're between 0 and 1. So 1.0 is 100%, 0.0 is 0%, 0.5 is 50%. You could, of course, adjust this to your liking. So you can change it. Say you want your shields to be 100. You would just have to adjust for that in the HUD later. There's a good chance we'll be doing something like this to make it simpler in the future. But we don't have any complex logic going on in here, so a standard ratio is perfectly fine. Okay, and now we can scroll down, and we want to go down to our take damage function, which for me is actually very close to the bottom. Here we go. First thing we want to do is add our 2 new booleans in here. You don't have to set the default values in the CPP if you set them in the .h. So you can see I just made boolean should ignore shields, boolean should ignore health. And this is all the logic we had in the previous episode. This is health minus equals. We actually were just using damage amount. And then we were basically doing a clamp to say, make sure that the health is not greater than 0. If it's not, in this case, we want to reset it back to 0. But then we also want to call die, which is going to respawn the player and different things like that. But you can see I have quite a bit of new stuff going on here. I have a new variable that we're using. I have all this logic for shields, and I'm utilizing both the should ignore booleans that we've added. So let's start at the top and take a look at what we're doing. So I've made a new float that is a local variable to this function. That way I can modify this to my liking without modifying the passed in parameter. It's not required that you do this, but it does keep it a little bit neater because as our take damage gets a little bit more advanced, we may have damage modifiers. We may do more stuff based on if it's a headshot or not. We already kind of do this, but we were doing it in the blueprint very simply because we didn't have other logic set up. We just checked for collision and dealt the damage. Later, as we get more advanced and each weapon has their own damage that they do, we're going to have modifiers in here. We're going to have other factors that could play into this. And so we may want to keep the damage amount that's passed in, the base damage, flat so that we can always utilize it, but then use another variable to apply modifiers and other things like that. So it's not required for now, but I do recommend doing it. So literally make a new float, set it equal to the damage amount that's passed into the function. Then we're going to address shields first, because normally this is what is going to be taken, and then health after. So the first thing I do is I make sure not, which is the exclamation mark, should ignore shields. So if we should not ignore shields, then we know that we can damage the shield. Okay? So here's the shield logic. Basically, I do make sure the shield amount is greater than 0. If it's not, it is going to be 0 or less than 0, in which case we want to just go and attack the health. The health should be what takes the damage, not the shield. So we don't need to try and do any logic here and try and figure out what this value is going to be. It doesn't matter because the player doesn't have any shield. Okay, But if it is greater than 0, we go into the if statement, and then we do this logic in here. So I check if shield amount minus finalized damage is greater than or equal to 0.0f. Now, what this means is my shield amount that is remaining, my trap, I was passing a default value of 0.3 as the damage amount. So I would lose 0.3 health every single time I ran into one of those spikes. Let's say I had 0.5 shield left, so half my shield. 0.5 minus 0.3 is 0.2, or 0.2, which is greater than or equal to 0.0. Okay? So, if I still have shield remaining, that's what this if is checking, we're going to go into here. We're going to actually subtract. You see, instead of just doing minus like we are here, we're doing minus equals. We're going to get the new shield amount by subtracting finalized damage from it. All right, so 0.5 equals 0.5 minus 0.3. That's how this reads. So shield amount is going to be set to 0.2 like we just figured out earlier. And then we're going to basically take away all of finalized damage. Think of it this way. The damage has already been taken from shield amount. So finalized damage should be 0 at this point. We're saying we don't have any additional damage to deal. It's the shield has absorbed it all. Else, though, if shield amount minus finalized damage is not greater than or equal to 0.0, that is when we need to spill through and damage the character's health. Okay, so let's think about this. Let's say our shield amount was 0.1, and the damage was 0.3. 0.1 minus 0.3 is negative 0.2, which is not greater than or equal to 0.0. So we're going to go into the else statement here. We're going to have negative 0.2 if we do that operation, okay? So we need to get that value to know how much damage still has to be applied to the character's health. Now, think about it this way. We determined that the damage that was remaining after the shield was completely depleted would be negative 0.2. Okay. Well, if you tried to decrease the character's health by negative 0.2, it would add 0.2 to the player's health. They would actually heal a little bit. That's not what we want. So we have to make sure when we're doing this, we only work in positive values. So the way this is handled now is I take my finalized damage and I set it equal to FAB's, float absolute value, of shield amount minus finalized damage. So this is the same thing that we were doing up here, okay? This is what gets us our negative 0.2, but then we get the absolute value of it, which means it takes away the sign. It's just the distance from 0. So instead of being negative 0.2, it's flat out 0.2. So we say our finalized damage is 0.2, but we still decrease our shield amount to be 0. We want to empty that out because the shield has been depleted now. This is going to come into play in the next section. As long as we're not ignoring health, we can then deal additional damage to the character's health now that we have 0.2 remaining. Okay? So after the shield stuff is done, or if shields were ignored, it's going to end up going to this line eventually, and make sure that we should not ignore health. So exclamation mark should ignore health, meaning we should not ignore health. If we shouldn't, then we can go ahead and go into this if statement. Otherwise, nothing happens and no damage is taken at the current time. But let's assume that we are not ignoring the health. Now we want to say health minus equals finalized damage. Now, if shields are ignored, then finalized damage is just the damage amount, and we do health minus the finalized damage. However, if the shields were not ignored, this is why we had to set the finalized damage in here, because this is 0.2, this still remains. So now when we do health minus equals finalized damage, we're not taking the full damage amount, we're taking the rest of the stuff that has to spill through. So any damage that broke the shield but then has to spill through to the character's health is right here. So health minus equals the rest of that damage. That's going to set health equal to the result of that. So for example, if health was full, they had 1.0 and the finalized damage is 0.2. This is going to set health to 0.8 because it's going to subtract those two. Then this is the same logic we had, so I didn't change anything here. But basically, I just determine if the health is less than or equal to 0.0. If it is, I default it to be 0.0, and then I just call die. That way we can respawn the player and do everything else that we'll need to do with that. All right. And now with that all done and good, we need to make sure that we actually watch this and it's working in the game. And we need to add a progress bar to track it for the player to view it. So we can go into our widgets and go into our character HUD. I've actually copied this progress bar, the health bar, and just pasted a new one in, but you can also just as easily bring in a new progress bar. I just copied it so that I had all the same size and location and everything. I just placed it above the health bar. I changed it to shield bar. I changed the color here at the fill color and opacity to be a light blue. And then also in the progress percent section, I hit add binding or create binding here to make a new one. So this was our health bar percent that we made a long time ago. We're basically going to use this exact same strategy, except we're going to use it with our shield amount. It's a very simple binding. When you create the binding here, it is going to automatically open this function up for you. If it doesn't, you can just hit graph and you should see it here. I've actually moved it up so that they're next to each other, but it will be your bottom function if you just made it. And mine is called get shield bar %0. That's the default name that generated for it. And again, you can either copy or get health bar % if you've done that, or if you're not worried about that, we'll just do it because it's super simple here. For now, we only have one character. We haven't gotten into a lot of stuff with like ownership of the widgets and all this fancy stuff that we're definitely going to be doing later. It's actually very simple, but we just haven't done it yet. So a simple way to get the proper character is get player character 0. Again, it will have to adjust later to be the owner of the widget or to be the owner of the current possessed pawn or player, whatever it may be. We're going to cast this to make sure it's the correct type to be able to get the variable from. For me, that is my FPS tutorial character. That is where we added the shield amount variable. And then off of that, literally, we're going to get the shield amount and pass it directly into the return node. It's actually that simple. Now this progress bar on the HUD will be bound to the shield amount that the character has, player character 0 has. Now with that done, we have two progress bars. One is for health, one is for shields. So when you come into your game, it should bind properly. And if you're not taking damage yet anywhere, you won't be able to see any differences. You know, it'll just be two full progress bars, so you do have to take damage to test it. So a simple way to do that, if you haven't already set this up, is to have an object such as what I'm calling trap here. I'm going to actually rename this live because I want this to be trap BP. We are going to make trap code classes, so I don't want to confuse anybody with that in the future. So I'm calling this trap BP from now on. And that consists of these little spikes that I put around the map. They're very simple. They literally don't even have like variables for themselves. They don't have damage. I'm just doing very arbitrary stuff right now. This will change later. This is just to prove a point of how this works. So essentially what we're doing is we have the event hit in this trap BP. So essentially when something collides with this object, this event is going to fire. Specifically with the static mesh, it has a block all dynamic. So anything that gets blocked by it will trigger the event hit. Other is the other actor that hit it. So we cast that to our FPS tutorial character. If the cast succeeds, that means it was the character that collided with this. So we want to call take damage on that character, which you can do by simply calling take damage. Then we set the damage amount to whatever value we want. We could do 1, it could kill them instantly. We could do 0.5 to take half their health. And then you choose if you want to ignore shields or ignore health. And then I'm just destroying this trap afterwards so it can only hit the player one time. And that's pretty much it, guys. There's a lot more we can do with this system, such as regenerating shields, regenerating health, or forcing the player to have to heal their health and shields. We could also do things like indicators when we're taking damage, you know, a little blood effect on the screen, or some sort of take damage effect, broken shield effect. We could have sound effects that relate to these things. There's a ton that we can do with them, but this is the basic logic that we require to separate our shield and health damage in the series. So anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, please subscribe. It does more for myself and the channel than anything else you can do. I just really appreciate it. And I am really, really grateful to all my Patreon members and YouTube membership subscribers. Thank you guys for all the love and support. And I really can't wait to see where these series go. I love getting these episodes out to you every single week. So thank you so much. If you guys did have any issues with any content in this episode or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord community. It's completely free, and I'll be happy to help you out with any issues that you ran into. A lot of the other community members will as well. But anyway, guys, that's all I got. So thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.